Hi everyone, it's Pastor Matt with another Friendship Together video. And as I was reading in Acts this week, I came to a passage in Acts chapter 14 that both tickled my funny bone and taught me an important lesson. It's in Luke 14, while Paul and Barnabas are on a missionary journey together, and they visit the city of Lystra. And there, Paul comes in contact with a man whose feet don't work. And God uses Paul to bring healing to that man's life. And that man gets up and he starts to walk around and run around. And I want you to listen to the reaction of the people of Lystra to this healing. We read in Acts 14, verse 11, "And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, 'The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men.' Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priests of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance of the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifices with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In the past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness.' Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them." This is an amazing reception. Can you imagine going into a town and having people greet you as one of their gods? They want to sacrifice to you. This is a level of adulation that none of us have ever experienced in our lives. And it is amusing to me because we read the very next verse. Look at the very next verse, verse 19. "But Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, and having persuaded the crowds, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead." Now, I didn't skip any material in between there. In verse 18, it says, even with those words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them. The people are praising them as gods in verse 18. And in verse 19, the very next verse, they are stoning Paul and presuming that he is dead. This amazing and quick turnaround is a reminder to me that when you're following after Jesus, people are going to think a lot of different things about you. Sometimes you're going to run into people who think you are amazing because you're following Jesus, and you're amazing in all that you do. And other times you're going to run into people who think you are lousy and crazy because you're following Jesus or because of your life. They're just going to look down on you. Paul actually experienced both of those things in two verses here. He went from being worshiped as a god to being stoned and people thinking that he was dead. This was actually the same group of people who within a single verse turned from, "Wow, you're amazing, you're a god," to, "Okay, we're going to stone you and kill you." These are extremes. But as followers of Jesus, we're going to experience these things as we go through our lives. We're going to experience people who are like, "You're amazing, you're great." And we're also going to experience a whole nother group of people who are like, "You're terrible, you're awful." And what we see from Paul throughout the book of Acts is that he is in no way dependent upon that. Paul isn't driven by, his cares aren't surrounding whether or not people appreciate him or don't appreciate him. Whether they love him or hate him, that doesn't matter to Paul, because Paul is so firmly grounded in the fact that God loves him. God has saved him, and God's called him to spread the message of salvation among people. He's going to be faithful to that call, whether people love it or hate it. He's going to be faithful to God, whether people love it or hate it. And that's God's call in our life, to remember how secure we are in the love of our God. So much so that whether or not people love us or hate us, that doesn't matter in light of who God is and the security of our relationship with Him. Let's live into that this week.